Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
Hey guys, this is your co-host Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average pun-making swearwolf that loves to explore the spookier things in life.
Hey everybody, I'm John Thomas, paranormal investigator, super smartass, and film lover extraordinaire.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of my Dracula-loving pals? We have such a special treat for all of our listeners in tonight's episode. Tonight, we'll be talking with the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Welcome to the 3Haunted Podcast Dacre Stoker. It's an honor to have you join us this evening.
Well, Ashley and John, it's my pleasure to be here, and especially this is the 125th anniversary of Dracula. Glad to be chatting to all the fans out there on this special occasion.
Yes, so Dracula has made many appearances in our podcast. We talk about a lot of horror films, and a lot of our listeners know that that's like one of my top three vampire stories. And so it's really exciting to have you on. You and Ian Holt did the official sequel, right? Dracula the Undead?
We did. That was back in 2009, I think. We actually wrote the continuation of Bram's story, where the action picks up 25 years after the original novel ends. And for your listeners out there, you wonder how the heck can two guys do that if Dracula was killed at the end of the story? But here's the first skill testing question of the evening, even to you, Ashley and John. As Bram Stoker wrote it, how was Dracula supposedly killed? What instruments were used to put down the Great Count? Any questions, any guesses? Because it's different in the book than the movies.
So here's the deal. I feel it would be unfair for me to answer because I read Dracula the Undead. So I'm not going to answer. I'll let John go.
No.
Put John on the spot.
Oh yeah, thanks. It's been so long, I don't even remember, to be honest with you. But I'm reading the sequel now, actually. So
I'll take you off the hook, guys. and it's kind of it's an ambiguity that Bram presented, I believe, because he wanted to give an out. So earlier in the novel, when Van Helsing explains to the band of heroes, how you've actually got to kill Lucy, it's a wooden stake, cut the throat, cut the neck completely, and insert garlic. And in Dracula, at the very end, when Harker and Morris jump on the crate, they're surrounded by the gypsies, it's a Bowie knife that's thrust into the Count's chest. Harker's only able to slit the throat with a kukri blade, and the Count gets a look of peace on his face, and he crumbles into dust. So I present to you this question: was the Count really killed when he crumbled into dust? I think not, because he wanted his great-grandnephew years later to come back and write the sequel. How's that for opportunistic?
yes, love it.
I like the spin on that. I would love to get back to the story in a little bit, but I want to backtrack to how did you even decide to carry on this legacy? That's a big legacy to carry on. What first introduced you to Bram and his work, and then what then inspired you to say, I want to pick up the helm?
Yeah, it's a long and complicated story, and I'll give you the real short version. I grew up in Montreal, Canada, being joked by all my friends around Halloween, like, oh, the Stokers at Halloween, are you going to take our blood, or are you going to give us candy? It's like, what do you expect? I was like brought up like the Addams Family or the Munsters? No, we were very normal people, and I hardly even knew about the legacy until about the age of 12 or 13, when my dad finally told me. He said, look, your great-grandfather was Bram's youngest brother, and your grandfather's pretty cool himself. He invented ozone therapy, and there was two other doctors in the family, one who actually helped Bram write Dracula, and then, who was Bram? And he was this famous author who wrote Dracula and 12 other books. But it wasn't until I got to university and had to write a paper on some author in one of my English classes that I thought, okay, it's now time to figure out the family legacy. And there wasn't much. We didn't have like a booklet, like a family album or anything. I had to read a book by two Boston College professors, McNally and Florescu, who really became the guys that sort of put Bram Stoker and Vlad the Impaler on the map back in the 70s, they're the ones that got everything rolling. And that's what happened in my university years, but I didn't get into this writing gig until 2003. And, I just thought it was time to learn about some of the genealogy in the family. And it just happened to be a lucky time when Ian Holt was looking for someone to co-author a book that had to do with me digging into the family tree, so to speak, and represent Bram Stoker as a character in the story. And that really got me on like a year-long venture to go to conferences, look up archives, go to Ireland, trying to figure out all this stuff that was important in his life, so that when Bram became a character, as you both know, since you've either read or reading Drac the Undead, that the Stokers could represent Bram Stoker properly and accurately. So that's how it all got going, Ashley.
How did you get a hold of his journals? Because I know you've got his journals now, right? And his notes of the different characters, along with maybe some origins and what happened to them after.
Now this has been my 12-year quest. It took a while. First of all, Bram didn't leave an autobiography, so we don't know much firsthand about him writing any of his novels, and he wrote 12 of them and 20 some odd short stories. I had to go around and literally, I say the world. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the Dracula notes were. Seattle, Washington, where Paul Allen's estate owned the typescript. Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, where many more papers were. A couple other private collections in England, in Scotland. I went to Transylvania looking for records about Vlad the Impaler. I even climbed a volcanic mountain in Transylvania to find the fictional Castle Dracula. Different places, I checked out via Google all over the world. People had different letters, different things, and I was the guy that brought them all together to get a clear picture of what all these pieces of the puzzle would look like when they've come together. And that's what gave me the ideas of what did Bram mean by his stories, what did he leave out of his stories, what was edited out, what I could use in some of my stories that he meant to put in.
To me, it feels like you are following his legacy in a way that many people may not realize, because he did write biographies. He wrote, what was it, for Henry Irving?
He did. Yep.
And amongst others. And then he had his Dracula that he wrote. And I find it interesting. You're doing similar. You wrote your own Dracula, the continuation of it. And you also are, working on his autobiographical information and piecing that together. And so it's very much similar to what he did. I love what you did with the book, what you and Ian both did with the characters, because I think that when people read these books or they look into other pieces of literature that, carry through time, they get this is the happily ever after wrapped up in a bow. And I love that you brought it out and said, no, when people go through something like that, that leaves trauma, that leaves a mark. And maybe it's not as wrapped up in a bow as we thought it was. And I love that. I love that you challenged that and you brought a breath of fresh air to that.
I'm so glad you said that, because, we took a couple of lumps for altering it, daring to alter those characters at the end of the beloved Dracula novel that so many people came to embrace over the years, and we dared to change them. But just as you said, Ashley, it's like, and we coined the phrase post-Dracula stress syndrome, just like, people returning from the Gulf War, and you think, yeah, that's normal. They lost Lucy, they had to kill Lucy themselves. And then they lost Morris, and Peter Hawkins, the guy that owned the law firm that Jonathan worked in. So there was no bow. There was a tremendous traumatic experience of risking their lives and going to Transylvania and then finally coming back, and then boom, what do you got now? You got a child that's born that's going to have some questions. And this is where we come up with Quincy Harker, who's now looking for the answers of what happened to these friends of their parents and what happened 25 years ago, and who the heck is this supernatural creature that's now bopping around London making some trouble.
A few supernatural creatures.
Yeah.
And I like that. I don't think you so much changed the characters as you evolved them. in a sense of like, this is how that person, given their origin, given what they experienced, this is how they would potentially carry on afterwards. Like Arthur would be completely haunted by what he had to do and maybe lose himself over time. But also Mina, no, you know, we think about like how torn she was between Dracula and Jonathan, and to think that at the end of that all, she'd just be like, okay, well, it's me and Jonathan, we're good for life. And that she herself would not be haunted by what she felt and connected to with Dracula, and how that would also torment her, because it's like, I shouldn't feel that way, but I do. And so it's I loved it, honestly. I feel like each one of those arcs that they were given after Dracula made sense. And I know I saw some reviews where people are like, oh no. And I'm like, well, you know, like you said, when people hold on to a character or hold on to a moment in time, it's really hard for them to see past that moment. And for me, I felt like the moment that you guys brought forth was true. It was true to how something like that, if it were real, right? If we all went through what they did, how that would affect each person.
We needed to make it believable and plausible, and I think you just confirmed that, and thankfully you got it, and hopefully John will too when he finishes reading it, and he'll feel the same way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes.
I also love, and I want to know what inspired you to do this. I also love very much how you started to weave in, spoiler alert to those who haven't read the book, but not too much of a spoiler alert, the ongoing Jack the Ripper that's going on and how that was woven in. I like that. I like when worlds play together and when it's done in a way that makes sense. So for me, when I started, you know, when they're describing the bodies, I was just like, oh, are they going there? And then you hear about Jack the Ripper and I'm like, yes, they're going there. This is exciting.
Yes. Well, let me tell you something, Ashley. It came from Bram himself, and here's where it came from. The original preface for Dracula, which was discovered in 1989 by a researcher called Richard Dalby, he opened up the Icelandic edition, the translated version of Dracula that ended up in Iceland, and he recognized that the preface was about a page and a half long, whereas the preface to Dracula, which is about a quarter of a page long. So he took the thing to a translator, and it actually mentioned in the story that the story is real, and the murders that took place recently were similar to the Jack the Ripper stories that came into our story later. Now, the dates of the Jack the Ripper stories are just a couple of years before Bram Stoker started writing, 1890, when he started writing Dracula. Bram Stoker and Henry Irving were affected by the Jack the Ripper murders. They actually had to change the schedule of plays at the Lyceum Theater because people were scared to death to go out, and they didn't want to see macabre, scary stuff. So they had to change Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that was on stage to something a little more mundane during these Ripper murders. Remember, the police were not effective at all in stopping the murders. People of all social levels were affected. And so London was on edge. And I am convinced this is why Bram put that in the preface. He also had in his list of characters Detective Cotford, but he never used Detective Cotford in his list of characters. That's why Ian and I did. And I'm thinking that for a little while he was thinking to have a police presence, but then he had second thoughts, because if the police can't catch Jack the Ripper, how the heck are they going to catch Count Dracula, who is a much more formidable foe, being the supernatural. So that's why I think he was dropped. We put him back in and had him as you know, this policeman, this detective that was foiled by the Ripper, but was not going to get foiled by these new murders. So that's where it came from. It was Bram's original thoughts in that preface, and that's what got us going on it.
But I like that you said that, because you can kind of see that play through. Actually, it's not even kind of. It's very, like, she bluntly states it through the Countess. Is it Bathory? Am I saying that
Bathory.
right?
Yeah.
Bathory. By when she's watching him investigate, and she's like, he is so narrow-minded, so focused. He's just a zealot. compared to Van Helsing. She's like, he doesn't even get what's right in front of him. And she's like, I'm going to use that against him. And I'm like, oh no.
Well, this was the issue, of the time. The police were very narrow-minded. They did not have the open-mindedness, of somebody who was not bound by the scientific process. And this was a big issue in England at the time. It was an issue between Dr. Seward and Van Helsing. As I said, Bram had 3 brothers who were doctors, so he knew this very well. They were all focused on the scientific method, which meant that there was no open-minded thinking. It was all the tests and results of tests and repeat those tests, not, oh, what have we got here? And it is, sometimes you just have to believe in faith. This is where Mark Twain even came into the Dracula story. Bram Stoker was a good friend of Mark Twain's. He was his neighbor. Bram actually was an agent for one of his books that got published. And in that book called Round About the Equator, Bram Stoker actually borrowed this one particular line where Mark Twain says, faith is believing what you know ain't so. In Dracula, Bram actually had Dr. Seward and Van Helsing having a conversation, and Van Helsing said, you must have faith. And Seward said, what do you mean faith? I want you to believe. I once heard of an American who so defined faith as that faculty which enables us to believe things we know to be untrue. That American was Mark Twain.
That's Mark Twain. That's cool.
Isn't that bizarre that, here he is,
That's awesome.
and the guy, he's actually spent time out here near where I am in Northern California, in Calabasas County, and here he was, a neighbor of Bram's in Chelsea, and he gets a line in Dracula.
Your ability to weave things in like he did is really, it's uncanny. I like that you have your own style. You and Ian have your own style where the continuation, like you wouldn't read it and think, oh, that was also written by Bram. Everybody has their own writing style, but you're able to carry the essence of what storyline, in my opinion, you're able to achieve the essence of what Bram created. And so it does feel like a legacy continued versus what one might call fan fiction, right? I like your use of including elements of the real world at that time. You mentioned, I believe it was Oscar Wilde in there, and Bram's kind of feeling a bit of the envy with how well Oscar Wilde did, and they kind of started from the same space, but also the elements of like Jack the Ripper. And so I love when books do that to me because I'm not a historian. So I'm like, I don't know what part of this is real and what part of it's not real, because I know parts of those that's realistic, that happened. So then it's like, oh my gosh, what isn't real in this? And it really gets the reader because you start to question your own self of what's real, what's not real presented in the book. Obviously, some of it's a little bit more easy to ascertain, I think, unless Bram did, get put into a stroke by Basarab. But
Well, you see, the thing is, he did have a stroke, but did he get put into a stroke by Basarab? Not another question. Mind you, he was very good friend with the whole Wilde family. He went to school with William Wilde, Oscar's older brother. Oscar actually dated Florence Balcom, who Bram ended up sweeping away and marrying. So they were all very close. Bram was very congenial to Oscar Wilde throughout his life. I think he's a different, more flamboyant person than Bram was, but Mrs. Wilde was very close to Bram and became a literary mentor. So there are things that we took, Ashley, that you've noticed. We just didn't always take them exactly the same way and use them, but in general context, we used a lot of real things that happened in their lives and put into fiction in a way that we did what Bram did, create a willful suspension of disbelief so people read it, they believe it, they're not sure what's true or what's not. We did exactly the same thing in the prequel to Dracula, into Dracul, which hopefully you guys will read next, because I think it's a better overall story than Dracula Undead. I had more, 8 years under my belt, and a different, very strong co-author in J.D. Barker, who has actually gone on to write New York Times bestsellers for James Patterson, if you can believe it.
Yeah, J.D. Barker is a well-known name.
Yeah.
So was Countess Bathory, was she a character that was on his list of characters, or was that something that you
No.
conceived and contributed?
A great question, because a lot of people get that wrong. They think, oh, Bram Stoker was influenced by the history of Countess Elizabeth Bathory from Hungary. There is no record whatsoever in his notes. There was a record of Vlad the Impaler. We simply looked back in the history books in the same way Bram did, pulled out Vlad Dracula III. We decided, hey, if we're bringing Count Dracula back, we've got to have a formidable foe. We've got to have somebody who racks up there with in the historical background, and somebody who can, meet Count Dracula on an even keel, and have similar backstory as Bram utilized in Vlad the Impaler. So Bram, I don't think he knew anything of her. All the books that I know he used in his research that I talk about while I'm out here on this tour, I even show people pictures of the books. None of them mention Bathory. So I think that's something unique to our efforts, although other people have used her, but Bram Stoker, I don't think, knew anything about her.
She is definitely a presence. I love what you've been able to do with her that Bram did with Dracula is you're able to create sympathy at the same time that you're able to create like a disgust. Like we know this is yes, like we know this is a monster and like we shouldn't root for them, but we understand why maybe their souls were broken a bit, why they became that monster. And I know John and I have discussed this in the past when it comes to other, works of art. I especially love when someone can get me to understand and sympathize with something that is supposed to be the monster. Yeah. And maybe it's because I'm also a female, but you gave enough of her background and her memories and those flashbacks that it's like, oh my gosh, I completely understand why you are so angry. Get 'em, girl.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'm glad you have. Once again, you're spot on here. Ian is a guy from Brooklyn, New York, and right and wrong is different in Ian's life than in Dacre Stoker's life. Ian is a guy that says, hey, it's just a matter of degrees. There's really no black and white. It's all different shades of gray. And we've actually had conversations, sounds like what you and John do, discussing the characters. As we create our character, it was, all right, we want somebody who is not just good or bad, because that's not really what life is all about. There are different shades of goodness and badness, and sometimes it's an overlap of gray, and if it gets dark enough, then somebody's going to say, well, that's bad. You do it a hell of a lot of times, that's really bad. But then you can get away from that and do something that can vindicate yourself. So we wanted people to have that emotional sort of roller coaster when you're either rooting for or hating Bathory or Dracula or any other characters that we put out. It's not that simple, and that's what makes the reader really think and squirm and consider and discuss. That's what we like. So I think we got you guys right where we want you to.
You got me. I think that, she represents to me a lot of what was not discussed and just accepted as this is how it is in life. We see Mina even kind of sympathize when she sees her memories a bit and experiences it through her eyes. But Mina's still kind of judgmental towards her, like, yeah, that sucks, but you still shouldn't be bad. And it's like, man, Mina, you've only walked in her shoes for like a brief moment. But I do love how that character is developed, because you show us the monster first and like, wow, she's a bad lady. And then you start to show us the pieces of what brought her that way. And before you realize it, it's like, yeah, she is a bad lady, but man, that's awful. That's heartbreaking.
There's some justification, isn't there? Yeah, a little bit of justification.
So that was really neat, versus showing us the breakdown that then turned into a monster. We're given the monster, and then it almost tests our morality a bit, right? Because then we're being challenged with everything introduced. Well, am I then understanding where she's at? So then do I justify her behavior a little more? So, yeah, that was interesting. Well done.
Thank you. I'll tell Ian next time I see him.
Do you find that people get upset that Bathory is presented like as the face of just ultimate evil, and Dracula, who is also a creature that does similar, things of not so great choices, is representing like this Christianity, and so therefore isn't necessarily viewed as evil? Do you ever get any kind of like feedback or pushback on that? Like, why does the woman have to portray the evil and like the man is portraying the pious?
For 18 years or something, Dracula has always been the biggest badass in the universe. When you look at the Dracula Gothic genre, we introduced Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who in the history books stole all these virgins from her village, cut open their veins to bathe in her blood to keep her young. Not sure if she drank much of the blood, but could have, and I think that's part of the thing we did. So we only elevated her actually just a little bit from her role of being a real horrifying person in real life to being a supernatural female vampire that is a formidable foe to Dracula, who's trying to weasel his way out of being, the ultimate badass by kind of comparing good versus evil, and it's a religious icons and not. You got to believe in Christ before you can actually be afraid of him. So yeah, we kind of, rolled the dice a little bit and introduced some elements, but it's not like we came out and said, all females are bad because Bathory is the toughest of them all. We also wanted to introduce and make sure that people knew that Mina could be a pretty damn tough foe herself, much like Bram's mother and Bram's sister. Bram's mom was a female advocate for women's rights, for rights of the deaf and the mute, for judging if people how they be judged for criminal insanity. So, I think I'm pretty close behind Bram Stoker when you can say I'm an advocate for female rights. We just had to turn the tables on people and say, look, every now and then, a woman can be just as bad as a man can be, if not worse, especially using somebody from history who has a record to justify that. But no, we didn't get much pushback. It's a long-winded answer. I think people recognize that this was kind of a one-off, but they loved it. They loved that we included her because she was a real person. We brought her back to life.
Well, I like what you did with her character because, at least for her, she is who she is. She's not trying to hide behind the guise of something else. Like, I'm here to be a crusader for somebody else, or I'm trying to wage somebody else's war. I'm just a hammer. She is just like, you know what? You all suck. You do bad things. I don't like any of you. And so this is who I am. I also like that she has the utmost respect and admiration for Charles Darwin, because so do I. I love that little slip in there that she admires him because he describes, survival of the fittest, and she thinks she is the ultimate human. And I'm thinking, no, Miss Bathory, you are not human, but you are the ultimate creature.
You know that Darwin was also inserted into Dracula?
Was he?
Yeah.
Where did I miss that?
Well, because we didn't actually use his name, but in Bram's notes, sitting in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, there's a newspaper article about the New England vampire scare from 1896 in a newspaper called the New York World. And in it is a quote from Charles Darwin, who actually discovered the vampire bat in South America. And he says, we found these vampire bats in South America when we were there on our scientific explorations. They came out of the trees and drank blood from the cattle. Bram Stoker took that line, borrowed it, and had Quincy Morris say, when Van Helsing is trying to explain to the band of heroes that there's a vampire taking blood from Lucy, Quincy Morris says, yes, when I was in South America on our maneuvers, we had these bats come out of the trees and drink so much blood from my favorite horse that I had to put the mare down. That's just like he took the Mark Twain quote, he took Charles Darwin. And because Darwin had recently published Origin of the Species in 1859, not long before Bram started writing his novel, and he rocked the scientific and the religious world on their behinds with all of his discoveries, kind of like shifting the religion aspect of, oh, it's God's will and this is how he created everything the way it was, versus, just as you said, Origin of the Species, the strongest will survive. That's Bram's thinking as well. He was really into new and emerging sciences.
That's so creative. I never knew that was associated, so I love that even more. That's fun. It's fun to find out these little tidbits that we wouldn't know if you didn't do the work that you've been doing, putting all these things together.
There you go.
So I believe I read that you are working on something else as well, right? Is it the biography, or is there something I'm trying to remember?
It's close. And Ashley, it just came live yesterday. and it's really cool to be able to say it here in your show, and that is Dracula annotated for the 125th anniversary by Hellbound Publications. It's just live on Amazon in paperback and hardcover. It was a 3-year labor of love with a very weird, twisted story, so bear with me. My co-author was Robert 18 Basang, who was one of the 2 authors who were able to transcribe the 124 pages of Bram Stoker's Dracula notes that now live in the Museum of Philadelphia. They published those with McFarland Press along with Elizabeth Miller. This was really hard to do because Bram has terrible, terrible handwriting, and to figure out what he was saying and how the context of all these 124 pages. Robert came to me and said, we need to do an annotated Dracula for the 125th. I want you to help me. You've got such interesting perspective. You've done all this research. 2.5 years it took us to do this. And about a couple of weeks after the final edit, and then we still had more after this, but we call it the final edit, Robert had a heart attack, but not a serious one, but bad enough to put him in the hospital. And while he was there, I was actually on a fly fishing vacation, and I checked in with him, and he goes, oh my God, I'm in the hospital. It's bloody inconvenience. I want to do more edits. I said, Robert, chill out, man. You're in the hospital. You can wait. And he goes, no, well, they got me on these blood thinners, and I'm going to have a stint put in a couple of days, and this really sucks. And he was in his late 70s, and much like Renfield in Dracula, Robert Basang got out of bed because he was impatient to go to the bathroom, and he fell on all the wires and banged his head on the sink and ended up having a brain bleed so bad that he died from the hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
Now, in Dracula, Bram Stoker's eldest brother, Thornley Stoker, Sir William Thornley Stoker, who was the doctor, actually performed brain trephination surgery on 3 people that I saw in a medical journal. And in Bram Stoker's notes, he actually described and drew a diagram of how to do brain trephination surgery on Renfield in chapter 21. Renfield stayed alive long enough while they relieved the pressure from the bleeding in his brain to spill the beans on who Dracula was and where he was, so the band of heroes could actually save Mina while she was having her blood interaction with the Count. But sadly, both Renfield passed away, and I think in a sad but appropriate way, Robert Basang, who lived his life all about vampires, had the greatest vampire collection of books in the world, he died the same way Renfield did. And I'm so happy to be able to say that he gets the last word, because he was a guy that liked to have the last word, quite outspoken on things. The last word is now out on Hellbound Publications, Dracula for the annotated for the 120th anniversary. So that is now out, and it shows that his work was not for naught, and my contributions as well. So what this book does, though, it mentions all the places in the book Dracula where the Dracula notes were relevant. It shows the missing chapters that were taken out of the typescript based on our knowledge and our reading of the notes. It shows the things that were taken out of the typescript, like the changed ending of Dracula. There was an ending that not many people know about, and it was about a page that was crossed out. That is reinserted, but it's underlined so you know what was taken out by his publisher and what wasn't. And many other of these similar little things that were kind of secret little nuggets that we've been talking about. Walt Whitman, for instance, has pieces in there, as well as Charles Darwin and so on. So that's what's new and fresh in my life, Ashley.
That's a big deal, especially having people, you think about movies, people love the director's cut where the unreleased endings or the additional extended footage. People love that because they have such an attachment to that world, right? So they love more and more and more of it. So that's exciting to have that put together, and the hard work that you guys put together released for people on the 125 years anniversary. So you're doing a tour right now, right, for the 125th anniversary?
Yeah, it started back in May. The actual date of the 125th for the publication of Dracula was May 26, 1897. I was in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where Bram actually wrote the book. Just a couple of days before that, I was in Whitby, England, where Bram spent a summer holiday and did a lot of the research notes, where he set chapters 6, 7, and 8. Edinburgh, Scotland, where Bram worked in the theatre for a while. and then many points in between. And now I'm here in California. Going to be at, where am I going to be? Geez, in the next couple of days. Sacramento tomorrow. I am up in Angels. Where is it now?
Angels Camp.
Dacre. Angels Camp at the Bret Hart Theater, doing a presentation there. And I got a couple more here. Astoria, Oregon, we're heading up to. Twilight Land, I sort of joke and call it. And then I've got Halloween. I'm going to be in Dublin, Ireland at the Bram Stoker Festival. I've got some up in Salem, Massachusetts, which is not just for witches. You know, that's a vampire stronghold as well. Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University, where they have a lot of significant holdings of Bram Stoker's books and his work. So yeah, this has been an interesting year, traveling over, spreading the word. You know, I feel it's my responsibility to not only profit off of my famous relative's name by having 2 international bestsellers, but also, you know, let people know who he was and try to, you know, it's kind of a joke. It's like everybody knows Dracula, but I want them to know who Bram Stoker was in addition to who his creation was. So the creator and the creation are just as well known, and then my work will be done.
But I love that you put a piece of him in Dracula the Undead, by having him at the Lyceum and by working at the theater and trying to bring Dracula to life. And I thought that was fun. You know, you put it in there and it flowed effortlessly, and it almost made me question, like, oh my gosh, did Van Helsing really give Bram Stoker that that story? Did it really happen? I feel like there's something meta here going on. I thought it was fun.
Actually, again, I'm so glad you're taking it this way, you know, not taking it too seriously, because, you know, people think, oh, how can you have the author in his own sequel? That doesn't make sense. But yeah, lighten up a little bit, guys. I mean, this is cool. It's relevant. And we did the same thing in Dracula. He was a major character in the story. And as a matter of fact, the main model for Van Helsing was a real person named Arminius Vanbury, who is mentioned in Dracula. And we have him, this is a prequel now, we have him interacting with Bram and his brother in a way that Bram Stoker would have got to know him, and then when he fictionalized the writing of Dracula as a warning to the world that the vampires were in fact real, that Vanbury has been turned into Van Helsing, and other characters the same. So we've got the origin characters in Dracula, and you see why they have been morphed and changed into Seward, Holmwood, and others in Dracula, and then they continue in Dracula the Undead. So it's really a wonderful trilogy if you choose to read the whole series.
Well, and I do like that you add a bit of humor into the story itself, because a lot of the content that you are tackling can be heavy. Bathory's history is really intense, and that can be really heavy. And you have all of these people that have kind of, I don't want to give too much away in the storyline, but like that really took a toll on them, and you can see how that's impacted them for the worst. And so it helps when you're dealing with all of that, like, oh, that's hard, that's heart-wrenching. It's nice to have some of that humor, even when you have Holmwood who's offended that he's been merged into one character. First he's like, oh my gosh, that's offensive, you can't put me and Lucy in there. And it's like, oh, you're not in there. And he's like, wait, what? and then he's offended that, you know, he's been merged into one character, that Seward himself and Quincy have been put into one character. And it's just like, you just said you didn't want to be in there. And even Quincy Harker calls him out on that one. He's like, I thought you said you didn't want that. And he's like, yeah, that's right.
It's a tactic that I learned from good authors, that if you want to get people to swing through the full range of emotions and give them real horror, you've got to move them far away from the spectrum and give them some humor. If you don't, they're just going to kind of hum along, and they're going to get cold to what you're trying to do, and they're going to be resistant. But if you trick them with a little bit of humor, then it's easier to get them to be horrified.
Yeah, that desensitization kicks in really fast if it just stays heavy. But
yeah.
I like your trick, that just like swinging pendulum from the, oh, that was funny, to, oh my gosh, that's horrifying. So, and you're also going to be at the Winchester Mystery Mansion. I remember that because I got my ticket to be there.
Oh, good. So you're gonna be able to see the full story, and that's in San Jose?
Yes, that'll be in San Jose.
Good. So
I'm excited for that.
good. Well, I'll get a chance to meet you, and you get to see the story, and you'll get to see Bram's notes. You'll get to see typescript. You'll get to see all kinds of cool little film clips. You get to see me in Transylvania on top of this extinct volcano with my son, where we ended up having a little problem getting down because the weather closed in on us. But that's another story.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's exciting that you're bringing all of those things, transporting with you and doing this tour. And speaking of tours, you mentioned in your, I believe it was the PR that you sent, that you led Dracula tours, right?
I do. I lead them to places in Romania where Vlad the Impaler actually ruled and fought battles and impaled people and so on, and also places where Bram Stoker set the story. So we've got Transylvania tours. We also run one, as I mentioned, going to not just the 125th, but other years as well, to Dublin, Ireland, to Whitby, and Cruden Bay, Scotland. Sort of a big, huge triangle, not always on the same trip, but giving people an opportunity if they want to go to London or not, because, of course, Lyceum Theatre, Highgate Cemetery, Spaniards Inn, other places where Dracula took place. So we're kind of retracing the steps on a literary legacy tour to these cool places. And the company that I work with is called ExperienceTransylvania.com. And your listeners can check that place out and look at their website, because all of the information about our tours are there.
Dacre, I'm going to be there.
Come on. We've taken a bit of a break from Transylvania because, of course, the Ukraine war, a lot of refugees were streaming into parts of Transylvania, which we needed to give them a little bit of a break. We didn't want to sort of take tourists over there while their hotels were, being putting up poor displaced Ukrainians. But we feel by June they will have at least established, how they're doing things, and I think it's safe to go back, but also not stressing the infrastructure to go back June of 2023. So come on, Ashley, bring some of your listeners. Let's have fun time over there. It's a wonderful country.
Don't put it past me. It's been on my bucket list to go over to Transylvania, to go to Romania and do like that. I know they have the Vlad the Impaler tour where you go to the different castles, but I would much rather do a literary legacy tour.
Well, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just all marketing, isn't it? We go to the same castles, we do the same thing, and we probably drink slightly better wine over there than they'll present you, because there's some good wine, but we do it nicely.
You had me at wine. So at your different events that you're going to for the 125th anniversary, do you take like books to be signed, or how does that work?
I have a supply of books. It's kind of dwindling now because they've gone so well in the first three places. But I do have books with me. I'll save. No, I do have books. We sign them. I've got posters. We've got all kinds of cool things. And if I run out, the good thing is at our website, bramstokerestate.com, I've got books at home. I sign them and send them out that way as well.
Now, I do have a question for you. I don't know if you're allowed to answer it. But I read somewhere on the magical interwebs that I believe it was Dracula the Undead has been purchased for screen. Is that correct? For film?
Close. It was Dracula that was actually...
Oh, it's Dracula. Okay.
Yeah. The option for Dracula was picked up by Paramount, and they've actually extended it 3 times. Jeez. And so J.D. Barker and I are waiting, twiddling our thumbs, going, okay, guys, you're going to do something with this, or you're not going to do something with this? Yeah, we know they were working on an adaptation of screenwriters to adapt our book into a screenplay. So we're just hoping and waiting that it's going to move along, because that brings a whole nother set of circumstances. For one, we will start writing our continuation of it. Our agent has said, hey guys, don't write it yet. You want to make sure this actually gets greenlit first. So fingers crossed, hoping that's going to happen sometime soon.
I mean, vampires are in right now. They're very in again. So I don't think they ever truly go out, but right now they're trending hot again. We've seen, what is it called? Midnight Mass and the mini Dracula trilogy on Netflix. Like, there's a lot of vampires surfacing right now. So I'm hoping.
Nicolas Cage is playing Dracula in a Renfield movie. So if Nick Cage is doing Dracula, they're in. They're in, baby.
They're in right now. Exactly. So my fingers are crossed for you for Dracula. Yes. So, reading Dracula the Undead, holy moly, your ability to describe the settings and everything in place is very specific and it's very descriptive. So my question to you is, did you visit all of these places before you wrote about them, or how did you keep those vivid places described? Or are they just made up? Because it feels very not made up to me.
Okay, here's the deal. It's not made up at all. We actually had a friend, Ian had a friend, he became my friend, fellow Canadian, Alexander Gallant is a researcher, and he was able to find maps of all these places, descriptions of all the different weapons and aircraft and everything else that was available at the time that put us in the right place at the right time. I learned how to do all that research while Alex was doing it. And did exactly the same thing in Dracula. My wife and I learned how to get back to maps from, the late 1800s, talk to people who ran clubs that are into, this different types of guns, so that they worked exactly the way. Found historians and archives to tell us what a castle looked like back in the day, when it had a center part, when it got destroyed. So it's a long, painstaking business, but I'm so glad you brought it up because Gallant did a great job for Dracula the Undead, and so many people love to try to catch us on these details and catch us out that it gives me great pleasure when I say, actually, by the way, this was there at the time, and let me show you the reference to why we know that was there, or this happened at this time. So not that I'm, beyond making a mistake every now and then, but I know, especially with the name Stoker, people love to catch you out, and I love to not be caught out. So trying to get it right is a great challenge, and I think we succeeded in most cases.
So do you think that any of your children or grandchildren are going to carry on the legacy of Bram Stoker, of Dracula?
Well, I got a lead on this. My son is his name is William Parker Stoker. He's a PhD student finishing. He's got a year to go in his dissertation. Right now he's into Ernest Hemingway, but he's my number one editor. He is very into the period. He knows how to edit in the Victorian era stuff. And he actually, he's enjoyed coming to Ireland on some of my trips, to Whitby on my trips. He was the one that came with me to Romania on this tour where we climbed this extinct volcano and kind of got stuck up there. So he's in it, and I think he will be the one carrying the mantle for me, and then hopefully if he is prolific and has kids, he'll pass it on to them as well. But it does mean something to us, Ashley, that it is passed on, because as my wife said, if I didn't do it in my generation, there weren't many kids in my age or my generation that were going to do it. And if it was lost, it was probably gone forever. So digging into Bram and his life and his legacy, there was a rhyme and a reason for it. And now that I've done it, by golly, I'm going to keep it alive so it doesn't get lost.
And profit, right?
It helps.
Doesn't hurt.
It helps fund the travel expenses. It doesn't make me rich, but boy, it gives me a rich life, and it really enjoyable to get around, meet people, go on podcasts like this, travel the world, and see people and help spread the word. It's a lot of fun. It sure beats teaching school that I did for 25 years.
What did you teach?
PE and science.
Oh, okay. Which science?
Biology.
Do you think that biology background helped you with describing some of these dead bodies and murders?
It helped me come up with really weird ideas when you think about how, blood stuff and how to kill a vampire, with garlic and infusing it into oxygen and molecules. I mean, yes, it did give me a little bit of an advantage. Plus, I'll tell you something really bizarre. I had a really good friend when I was involved in the sport of modern pentathlon as the Olympic coach for Canada, who diagnosed his own cancer. And as a result, I thought, oh my God, here was a guy taking a culture from his lungs and realizing that he had lung cancer.
Wow.
How can we play with that when it comes to fiction and looking at, diagnosing vampirism in blood and blood disease and so on? That's coming in another book. So it does help to have a little scientific background to do stuff like that and to freelance and just dream about it.
Well, I like that you gave that nod to that when you were talking about the inspector and what happened to his brother. And he's like, yeah, they played on our superstition and our fears only to find out later this is what bodies do, or, what dead bodies do. And so it was sad, but then you also understand more of his motivation on why he won't default. That's almost his blind spot, right? So I like that you gave him that origin because it helped explain why he has such a stubborn blind spot to the supernatural and the paranormal, even when it's right in front of him, because of what happened with his brother and how, his grave was desecrated. But some of those scenes, Dacre, like when Arthur's dreaming about Lucy, ooh, that was visual. That was very visceral.
People look at me and go, "No, Dacre, you didn't write that." I say, "No, that was Ian Holt. I'm pretty strictly that was Ian. He's the gory
Don't
guy."
blame Ian. Yeah, he did it well.
No, I mean really, he's a horror movie guy, and I'm not so much, but my wife gets grossed out, I get grossed out, but it's okay. It needs a place because it can't be just all white toast. You got to make sure that you have some blood and guts in there, and I'm getting better with it.
Yeah, that was horrifying. And you could tell that person who wrote that, like, they know their horror and their gore pretty well. Now, that's my I guess my one big question for you was how this process went. How did you guys marry the ideas that you had together, working as two writers?
Well, every writing project that I've been involved in, I've used two authors because I am not a strong finishing writer. That's not I haven't been trained to do that, and it's not my profession. I'm getting a little old to learn new stuff. So what we do is, and again, each one's different with Ian Holt than it was with Barker. So I'll tell you a little bit about both. With Ian Holt, we both create an outline together, but he also had a screenplay that was the very beginning outline. We had to add Bram Stoker to it. We had to add Cotford to it. So I came up with the ideas of what would Bram Stoker be like, the characterization of him, what would he be saying in situations like this. So I wrote that portion. I wrote the Cotford stuff because I actually have a little bit of a law enforcement background as a volunteer with the sheriff's office and helping with search and rescue and cool stuff like that. So I provided that. I passed it to Ian. He integrated that into his screenplay and into the story, the parts that he did. And then we both would go through it and make sure that the voice is fairly consistent, and that would be his, not mine. Now, with J.D. Barker, it was very similar, but there was not one specific section that I took. I did all the research. I created the outline for the story, where things are supposed to start, provided lots of text box throughout the whole story. He then would take that and integrate it as he saw fit. And that was sort of smaller pieces that could add, let's say, color commentary, so to speak, to the story that fit into the outline that we agreed upon. And then you go through that, you use independent editors from time to time, which we all did, and then when it comes back from the editor, you've got to say, agree, disagree, oh no, massage this, take this back, move this around, and then it goes back to the editor again, and then they're sort of looking at smoothing that there's no rough edges between Dacre's writing style and Ian's or Dacre's and JD's. And that's the key to sort of get everything to sort of blend together. And JD was so good at that. He had some other good books under his belt. So we spent less time with the editors on Dracula book than we did with Drac the Undead. So that's sort of a nutshell of how it works. And it boils down to good communication and good trust between two people that it's obvious that, I'm not going to be able to do as much as the other guy with the finished product, but I'm going to hold my weight when it comes to all the research, making sure that everything that pertains to anybody that has anything to do with Stoker or Dracula is going to be right, so that I feed that to them and they can go play with it.
That's pretty awesome. And the next one that you'll be working on, are you also pairing with somebody? Or I know you said you want to do a little bit more of the writing yourself, so how's that one going to work?
I'm working with a professor from University of North Georgia. I live in South Carolina, so he's not too far from me, and we get together in Atlanta from time to time and compare notes. We also do a lot on Zoom, but it's Dr. Leverett Butts. We've written a couple of short stories together that one's gone into Weird Tales, a couple of anthologies, so we already have a great working relationship. Again, he takes my outline, he takes the overall story arc that I've created, and he says, yeah, I can work with this in frame. But sometimes he comes back and says, yeah, what do you think about this? He said, yeah, I like it. Let's go with it. Or no, I don't think that's appropriate. I got something else coming for you. And I have been writing more dialogue because Bram Stoker or one of his siblings or his wife and son are characters in these stories, and I know them so well from all my research that I do get to contribute to their dialogue, their text, and then Lev simply incorporates that, and then but we just both have to end up agreeing on it to make sure it's a good finished product and no egos or one has to go above the other for the good of the overall project.
I think that's great. Learning how to work with somebody else to bring about what your main goal and dream is. I feel like, especially when you get creatives together, that can be sometimes where the heads get butted.
They can.
So,
they can. You're right.
So it's awesome that you've been able to find that process with different people too. It's not just one person that you've learned to, create and have that harmonious relationship with. You're kind of doing that with different people and coming up with really spectacular books. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and it's all about, you do this at the beginning. It's kind of like having a prenuptial arrangement, with a marriage. Let's get the rules set up straight from the beginning so no feelings are hurt when it's crunch time.
So is there anything you'd like to promote while we have you on? Anything else? I know you're doing the 125 years, but is there anything else?
Not really. I think we've covered it. It's just really exciting to be out here doing this at the time that the annotated Dracula for the 125th has come out. I just wish it had come out, a month ago, so I could have had copies and brought them here and sold them with all the others. But I'll no problem directing people to Amazon, or if they want them signed, come to bramstokerestate.com. My signature shop will have those books and copies of all the others. And no, that's really it. I thank both of you guys for your interest and your excellent preparation and the fact that you like one of my books already, and hopefully you'll like another one when I see you at the Winchester House and convince you to read Dracula.
Oh, you don't have to do much convincing. I love Dracula the Undead. I will absolutely read Dracula. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really lovely to have you on and talk to you and pick your brain about everything. And I'm sure I'll come up with like a million more questions once it's over. But I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Winchester Mystery Mansion, Mystery House.
Yeah, likewise. And John, I hope you're enjoying the end of the fall or the fall season in Colorado, and enjoy your reading as well, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm kind of in the beginning of the book, but I'm liking it so far. I'm sucked in already, and I can't wait to finish it. So,
well, Ashley and I have given you such a good preamble.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have to power through this thing now. You kind of know what's coming, but I know Ashley didn't give away everything. Good for both.
Yeah,
of you.
she's good at that.
I didn't give away the big spoilers or the ending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't. I know better.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thanks again, guys. To all your listeners, have a safe and scary Halloween when it comes around the corner.
Yes. All right, John, bring us home.
All right. Thank you again to Dacre for coming on. We appreciate it. This has been absolutely amazing, and I am so happy that you were here. Thank you for listening to this episode of 3Haunted Podcast with your host. I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And if you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss one crazy moment.
Until next time. Are you looking for more awesome podcasts? Head on over to withoutyourhead.com for access to the Without Your Head podcast network, where you'll find a variety of podcasts sure to keep you entertained and coming back for more.